Alright, with everything we've talked about up to this point, I figured vampires would be the next way to go. So I chose these two because obviously they do explore the territory in different tones and in different ways, but I do want to kind of do a compare and contrast a little bit, even though it's mostly just one and then the other, but you get the format by now, I assume. They were only 1 year apart, with I believe Let the Right One In being 2008 and Thirst being 2009. So we're gonna start with Let the Right One In. And I do remember when I started hearing about this movie, it was one of those movies that it's one of those movies where you start to hear more about it rather than necessarily. It's one of those movies that had such hype around it pretty much as soon as people started seeing it, and it became more of this. Everybody was hearing about it, and people were just kind of gradually seeing it. That probably played over the entire next year, but I was able to see it, I think, the following year it came out, despite the fact that I had heard so much about it prior to that. And we have this story that's actually the screenwriter adapted it from his own novel, and our setting is 1981, and we have a child who is bullied. It's on the surface it all sounds very familiar, but we do eventually get into some very unique territory even for the material. And eventually it turns into what's essentially this. I guess in any other movie you'd consider it a coming-of-age love story. It doesn't exactly come off that way, but it is the story of this boy and this girl, and a lot of the movie is built on how they communicate and how real their relationship feels before anything else even really comes into this, and that you get that vibe immediately the first time they meet. And regardless if one of them is like centuries older, they still have this back and forth that is very much in line with their ages, or what their ages are supposed to be. With the way the first time they meet each other, they kind of have that, boy-girl antagonizing each other way that's more or less innocent, and then eventually they start to like each other, and it's all really, the emotion that stems from this is where the movie's foundation is, and the performances and the writing really bring this out. The way they just communicate to each other, where they actually feel the age that they are, and it doesn't feel like a writer attempting to capture that. It just feels very natural between them. And there are those moments where it starts to get, after they have, kind of done the antagonizing, well, I've lived here longer and stuff like that, the tenderness does come rather quickly. Which would be the way kids are, where it's only antagonizing for so long, and then kind of before you even know it, you're just suddenly friends. It's just the way it works most of the time. And we get those especially tender moments, like the moment when she tries candy and she ends up puking because it's not blood. And his first instinct, seeing her like this, is to hug her. And it's just one of those really nice things, and there are those throughout the movie. There is also, it's kind of in that fine line between platonic and romantic love, and we have, like, the way she signs her letters, I like you so much. There's such an innocence to it, which is really a nice contrast to her actual nature and what the rest of the movie is doing around this story. And how I like the kind of separation between those two, to where it very much has that dark nature when we're seeing her and the dude she's with and what they're doing, and the way he sees her and the way she sees him, and how it's kind of this, she basically has to live this double life for herself, one that's innocent and one that's really not, whether it's her fault or not that she has to resort to that. And obviously we do also throw in the Stephen King style bullies, and yeah, the bullies are like the most ancient motivation tactic when it comes to a lonely character like Oscar. And it goes through all the cliches of the turning point will be whether or not he stands up for himself, and the bully may or may not be motivated himself by his own bully, who is most likely an older brother. It's a really old thing, but it still captures it well enough to where it all still feels real, regardless of how over the top sometimes the bullies may be. It still works to show what Oscar goes through and kind of to show how we know there's eventually going to be some kind of, maybe not necessarily a full change in his character, but enough to where we know we're going to see him pushed over the edge at some point. So it's effective enough. And as far as the adaptation goes, this is one of those cases where when you see that the author is adapting his own novel into the script, a lot of the times that does work, but then there are also kind of those doubts in the back of your mind where you think, well, is he gonna be able to cut it down, or is he gonna be like overly indulgent and try to put everything that's in his novel in it and doesn't want to get rid of anything and feels like everything must be there? And he does show a lot of restraint when you think about what all is in the story, but the really brilliant thing that he does is that it's like he omits stuff, but there's just enough in there, like there's just like one sign of those things in the movie themselves where the movie doesn't go into it, but technically it's still in there. There was the whole pedophile angle to where it's kind of like, they obviously don't go into that, and I don't really recall many, if any, hints at it, but there is something in there to where when we watch the two of them interact, it's like she clearly has like this power over him. I don't know if that's any direct relation to that or not. Like the moment when she's getting ready to do the Morse code with him through the wall, and she shoos him away, like he's a child in the way, and that's pretty much the way he behaves back to her. Just has this very childlike way whenever he is around her or being scolded by her. That's really interesting to. It's just a very interesting, mysterious, unsettling character, especially when we see what he's out there doing, regardless of what the cause is. It still takes a psychotic person to be able to do that, no matter if, whatever the circumstances are. And then there's obviously the other thing, the other big thing anyway, that the movie does hint at, which is the scene when we see a lot more than we think we're gonna see, when Oscar peeks in at her while she's dressing, and we see what appears to be a scar down there, and then we learn that, obviously going back to the book, you learn that Ellie is actually a boy, or was a boy at one point until castration, like hundreds of years prior to this. And they do, obviously there's that, but then there's also the line, I'm not a girl. But the brilliant thing about that line is that you can pretty much take that in a couple of ways. Obviously, there's the obvious, would you like me if I wasn't a girl? But anybody who doesn't know that part of the story can just take it as, when she says she's not a girl, she means she's a vampire. And it's that simple. But you can really kind of take that as either meaning, regardless of who the viewer is and what they know ahead of time. That it works like that for pretty much anybody watching it is the really brilliant thing he was able to do, to where he really didn't have to cut a whole lot out of his story as long as he was putting those little tiny things into where it was actually still in there anyway. It just didn't draw too much attention to it, and that's the great thing, is because it doesn't overcomplicate the movie itself, because if those things were in the movie and we actually went into them, it probably would have been too much and made it too, like it was trying to do. Obviously that's fine in a book where all the stuff in there has time to breathe, but in this hour and 55-minute movie, I think everything's in there at just the right amount it needs to be. So that, being able to show that kind of restraint and still kind of get what he wanted in there, I thought was just brilliant the way he was able to pull that off. And then there are moments like obviously it's a vampire movie, we're going to have our gory horror scenes. Well, it's not, I mean, it certainly has its moments, but for the most part, it's not particularly gory, at least probably not as much as you're expecting. And the great thing about it is these shocking and bloody moments happen, but they're so far between each other that there's the whole you never feel bombarded with it by any means, and obviously that also is going to make it probably 10 times more effective than it would have been when it comes back around again. And that they never like overdo it when it's there, but they do it just enough to like jar you or shock you, and then it's normal again for, well, this movie's this movie's definition of normal for a while until something shocking happens again. And they happen in just that perfect rhythm. Towards the end, we do start to get it a little more, but that obviously makes sense because we've been progressing to this, and it's going to start to get to unwind like that. So I thought that was really well done, and also in another way it's done. Obviously, Tomas Alfredson is our director, who would go on to do Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, so you're aware that just with that knowledge alone, that this guy is all about downplayed, very, very much so. And what I really like that he does here, particularly with the atmosphere, is, obviously, if you've heard me talk about it before, if there's one thing I'm an absolute, complete, and total sucker for, it is the snowy setting. I feel like in a movie, or even a picture even, or just any kind of artistic medium, there is nothing more relaxing and or unsettlingly calm than a snowy setting. Because it can look beautiful, and that's what it could be, but it could also be underneath something very sinister, covering up something very sinister. That's why I love the tagline to The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. So, the thing here is that everything in this movie, with the way we have that snowy setting, but then we also just kind of have this, I wouldn't say absence of color, but just everything in the shot, the way everything looks, just makes everything look cold constantly, no matter where we are, even if we're indoors. Everything about this movie just has this very cold appearance. You could take that for the figurative way, or just literally temperature-wise. And I thought that was really well done. And, of course, many of the shots as well. We've got the reverse Clockwork Orange scene, where we have the shot under the overpass, where it's the... Obviously, in A Clockwork Orange, it was the innocent, unknowing victim was down here, and the antagonizing thing here is standing up and has kind of a power position here. And it's the opposite. It kind of feels like it's the same shot, or the scene is set up in the same way, where we have the same view, only the threat is the one that's down here, and the person that should be up here in the power position is the unwitting victim. And that's a really effective and memorable scene. Then there is this moment, one of the first kills, when he's taking the guy out in the woods, when he gets caught by the dog people. And in this, the way this scene is shot, where we have the snow and we have the trees with nothing on them, and then it's just like blackness in the background with like maybe 2 street lamps, I guess, in the way distance. To me, this shot always looked like it was almost like a surreal stage or something, to where it's like, kind of like if Dogville had snow on it, where it just has this very blankness in the background, like there is nothing. Like, it's an interesting moment to have it look like this when he ends up getting interrupted by passersby, when it looks like they were literally in the middle of nowhere. And like I said, almost looks like a stage setting, almost, with you just how you have the blackness where like an audience would be, and just 2 spotlights pointing in this direction. I always thought that was a really cool shot. It's stuff that you have to really look to see. The moment when she goes to see if he's at the hospital, when she comes back out, and the receptionist or whatever comes out to look for her, we just kind of see this one whole shot of her in the building. And it's not till she starts moving you realize she's been attached to the building this whole time. And then when she starts to move, it's when you draw attention to it. I thought that's always been really well done to me. And just in general, you can sense the whole precision of it. I read somewhere that the jungle gym they hang out on, like the Rubik's Cube scene, and just in general outside that building, that jungle gym was erected specifically for this movie, to where it fit the format. So I thought that was that just detail in itself really brings out the precision of everything else. And That's obviously great. And of course the use of reflections is a common thing throughout the movie. Just constantly around every corner is a very good looking shot or some kind of detail that he's added that's just really makes the scene memorable and really etches it in your mind. So, and obviously going on that, this is a movie that has scenes that are pretty much, they have their place in vampire movie history forever. There's the moment when, once she has climbed the window and he's there after he's burned himself, and she sucks the blood out of him before he drops, is a scene I think we'll all remember forever. The scene in the pool, obviously, has got to be maybe a top 10 scene in vampire movie history, and that's a very exclusive list to be on, because there's so many of these. And the thing about it is, this movie manages to feel unique when there are so many movies out there that are trying to cover the vampire territory in different ways. It may seem redundant, but there are a lot of people out there making vampire movies that are trying to really, really change things up. Even now, like with What We Do in the Shadows and stuff like that. But in this, when we were still really doing this, what Jarmusch did with Only Lovers Left Alive, too, and we're in this era where we're trying to, not obviously not in like What We Do in the Shadows cases, but in other cases like what Jarmusch was doing, where we're taking this territory that used to just be seen as this, like the Bela Lugosi era, and we're taking it seriously, and this movie does that. And it was able to really break out and feel unique when so many people are trying to do this, but obviously if you have that many people trying, there's going to be like twice as many failures as there would be. And I think that's one of the big reasons it was able to stand out, apart from the fact of just how remarkably well done it is, with everything working together, all the stuff I was talking about, the details, the way it's shot, the performances, all of it working together, and we made a very great, memorable product. I will say I'm not really sure what the vast opinion on it is, but I do really like the remake as well that Matt Reeves did with Chloe Moretz. It is much more straightforward. They do take some stuff out of it. They change up some of the characters, like they get rid of the cat guy and stuff like that. When the cat scene is one of the absolute craziest scenes in this movie. But it is apparent that they took more out. But I think it has a fantastic atmosphere, and I love the way that Matt Reeves' movie has a lot more tension in it. Like, it's much more of a horror movie than this one is. But I don't think that was totally this one's purpose, more so than the other one was. The other one more so. But I thought what both of them were going for. They tell the story in different ways, but they're both very effective. So that's my feelings on that anyway. Thirst, once again, let the right one in. The author of the novel adapted it himself. Then we have Thirst. I just talked about with Freeway, how you take a well-known story like Little Red Riding Hood, and it's like you watch Freeway and you wouldn't believe that it's a retelling of that, but it is. Thirst, apparently, according to Chandler Park, is based on a very popular Emile Zola novel. You may realize that this is an Emile Zola novel that does not have vampires in it. I'm sure you've seen all the BBC adaptations. There was that Elizabeth Olsen movie. And Thirst is in there as well, apparently. So, but in this particular case, we've also once again changed up the characters too, but the very basic outline is there. But here we have a priest who is such a good dude that he's so selfless, he volunteers himself to take part in this medical experiment in hopes to finding a vaccine for a virus. And while this is taking place, he just happens to also run into an old friend who now has a wife, and his mom is always with him. His unbearable mother is always with him, and she is basically kind of living this Cinderella life with them, where she's kind of the one she'd rather be anywhere else. She's often looked down on. She's basically just there to appease them and take care of them, more or less. And she just absolutely hates her life, and to the point that she actually goes outside every night and just fucking runs. Because that's... if she can just get away from this for more than 5 minutes, that's her life highlight. So these two are obviously going to eventually find each other when this reuniting with his friend happens. And we go from there once we realize that this experiment, after having gone totally wrong, has also made him a vampire. So we watch this, and we're really drawn in by the way these two characters seem at totally opposite ends. He's got a life that he's very in tune with, this priest life. It's very much... it very much fits his personality, whereas she has a life that she's really desperately trying to break out of. But at the same time, they're both moonlighting, basically. When they're not doing this life, they spend their nightlife fighting off their desires. He has this, you know, whether it be sexual or otherwise, he's literally beating himself up to get these desires out of his head. Whereas she has these desires of attacking and or killing her husband. There is the moment when she is going to... just looking at his face just drives her to the point where she's ready to hit him, and instead of doing it, she just wipes his nose instead. And then the moment where while he sleeps, she pantomimes wanting to stab him through his open mouth, and it's like, I can't even imagine shooting that scene. It's so... It's more nerve-wracking. It's far more nerve-wracking than the knife scene in Aliens with the hand. And basically, eventually, fighting off these desires is only going to go so far. And to the point where, once we've reached a point, it's time to totally and completely bask in those forbidden desires. And yeah, it does become kind of it's a very, I don't know, people could probably see it as romantic, but it's very sexually driven, we'll say. If it's not love driven, it's at least lust driven, which goes along with the whole forbidden desire thing. But still, there is a romanticism to it. This movie has its own Superman scene. When Lois learns what Superman... well, she already knows, obviously, but she learns what he is, and so he holds her and basically... he doesn't fly, he's just jumping up and down, but it has the same effect. And for a while, this goes really well, until we reach a tragic turn, when it comes time for her to turn into a vampire as well. And when we had those moments where it was like, these characters came together because they had that same thing going on, about fighting off desires, and it felt like they were attracting in the perfect way. Well, now that she's a vampire, we learn that their desires very, very quickly go in opposite directions. He's been trying the whole movie to go into his bloodlust without killing anybody. Just very innocently, with nobody knowing, nobody gets hurt, nobody notices, nothing. Whereas she's ready to just kill and suck the blood of the first things that she sees, and she's willing to go around and do it to pretty much anybody. And then eventually we come to a point here. And so, while that does add a tragic element to it, watching them go in these directions, watching her more so descend into that direction, the total opposite of what he was trying to do, and he quite literally creates a monster doing it. This movie is also very well known for its really crazy-ass sense of humor. It's one of those movies where you really kind of wish you had been a fly on the wall in the writing room to just see what exactly was driving these ideas and how much people were laughing at what exactly. There's some stuff in there that's very straightforward, like just the abruptness of his suicide attempt when he just leaps out the window is amusing. But then we just really get into the craziness when she starts having these visions of her husband after they've supposedly killed him. When he took him down and he drowned him in a very kind of a place in the sun kind of scene. And she keeps seeing visions of him, and they do this thing with this whole idea of this nightmarish concept of being haunted by really exaggerated memories. Like, she remembers what she wanted to do to him, or things like when she wiped his nose, suddenly every time she sees him, he just has snot coming out everywhere. And the pantomiming stabbing him comes back. And it just gets completely out of control with seeing him in random places with his rock, just with these psychotic smiles on his face. And they're as quite funny to see so randomly as they are kind of terrifying. There's even the moment when she finds, during one of their sex sessions, she's seeing him just laying there between them. It's pretty clear to see where the comedic aspect of this terrifying situation comes in. And so apparently intentionally funny at that. That's very important to note. And because you can tell somebody with a really twisted sense of humor was behind this. And it's one of those movies to where just the way they portray it, just in the very over-the-top, in-your-face way that they do, I can see an audience not knowing how to take it. Because like I said, it's very much right in the middle of hilarious and terrifying. They pretty much cover both grounds with one image, multiple times. So that's really where the movie's strength is, too. That was kind of the most difficult task they had. But once again, it's a Chan Wook Park movie with his usual cinematographer, so you know it's going to be an absolute fucking visual feast. There's moments towards the beginning, especially when he's going through his phases where he's turning, where we're seeing a whole bunch of like simultaneous transitions and just really trippy shit that looks great. I really particularly like the cigar image, how it comes out, like fire first. And then there's a lot of white rooms in this movie. White rooms that are obviously just waiting to be drenched in red. And then there is the way he kind of... Obviously, it's a very gruesome movie. A lot of times it could be very gross and disgusting. The recorder scene at the beginning is... God. But, very jarring. But at the same time, there are moments when he kind of tries... It's like he's trying to take the vampire perspective. So the way blood is shot, like when it's coming out of like a wound or something, it's almost shot like it's... like the blood is being seductive. And like it's supposed to look appetizing or something. And I really like the way that he kind of went for that angle to make it look like that and not always going for just specifically the gross out when he used blood. Not that the blood ever succeeds in looking seductive or appetizing, but the way it's shot, it's like you can tell the characters see it that way. You know another thing I really like about this movie and what it does is, or how it goes about what it does, it's just kind of how, and it's funny, you see, it competed at Cannes, and it won one of the huge prizes. And it's weird how informal the movie feels when you're watching it. And I say that where, like you think about it being a Cannes movie, and, you know, Chan Wook Park being a very respected director, but the way he just went balls out with the way he shows all this, and when I talk about the informal stuff, it's kind of like, for starters, the way it's translated. Like, every time somebody says because or cuz something, it's actually spelled in the subtitles C-U-Z. And then, most importantly, you'll notice that this is a lot, and not just with vampires, but like The Walking Dead with walkers, and just, what was that shitty movie I saw recently? The Recall with Wesley Snipes, the alien movie. The whole movie, they never say aliens, they call them visitors. And it's like, there's this whole trend that's been going for a long time now, where people try to act above their genre by calling their monster something else. And it's like, oh, people won't take us seriously if we do this. No, this movie has no problem just using the word fucking vampire. Like, and I find that really admirable, that it's like, no, we're not going to do that. We're not taking ourselves that seriously. They're vampires. That's what they are. We're going to call them that. So I really liked that approach. And then it does hit a snag a bit, and that is mainly overall its length. It's 2 hours and 15 minutes, which is kind of long with the story. It does have certain places it wants to go. And it does, you know, get there without making it feel like it's just intentionally trying to pull it along, but it's like, by the time we get to the other people finding out who they are and what that results in, it does reach its peak status as a horror movie at this point, when she's pretty much just becomes a horror movie monster. Which you can see where that might be its downfall for a lot of people. And that's where it starts to feel lengthy, I thought. Even though I'm not necessarily opposed to the direction, that is the point where you kind of feel like the story has kind of run its course and it should be kind of getting to its climax a little faster than it does. However, once it does get there, we do have a fantastic ending. I just love the way this scene looks with the sunrise, and then there's so many different emotions going on with it. Like, there is, obviously it's tragic because they have to die. It's also romantic the way they die together, and at the same time, because we see what she's become, it's like, it's absolutely, and because that eventually he's probably only going to get so far before he can do this innocently. This is just an ending that has to happen because of what they are. And I really think that just really punctuates it nicely, and they don't drag it out any further. Once that happens, we're just done. So I thought that it's a really fantastic ending, even if we were kind of dragging through the mud a little bit before we got there. But that's a very brief period of it. So yeah, there's obviously different things going on here as far as whether you... obviously, I think it's pretty clear, as long as a movie knows what it's doing and tries and keeps a tone and knows that that's what it wants to do. It's kind of really hard to say, I prefer Thirst, because it's not taking itself seriously. It'll say the word vampire. It's crazy and kind of hilarious, and kind of mixing that with the terrifying. Or you can say you like Let the Right One In better, because it does take itself so seriously, and it does treat this with, weirdly enough, the movie where the characters are children is the one that's considered the mature handling of the subject matter. But, yeah, I do think it really just depends on what the director's vision is and if that's clear. And it's very clear Chan Wook Park wanted to make this crazy, hilarious, blood-drenched thing. And Alfredson was more about the whole very, very downplayed, keeping our shocking moments at bay so that when they happen it's a really big deal and it really gets you. I do think Let the Right One In achieves what it was going for more and better, and gets its points across a lot clearer, and actually has a lot more going on with it, and the way they were able to fit that in without it feeling overblown. And all the emotions in there. The fact that it's very emotionally driven really does help. And while Thirst is too, in a very, very different way. Like I said, it's definitely more of a lust movie than love or romance, even though you could technically call it a love story, for sure. But yeah, I do think Let the Right One In accomplishes more so what it was setting out to do, but you really gotta commend Thirst for just the crazy-ass, blood-drenched, sex-filled thing that it is. And the fact that it just looks so good, it's so incredibly visually appealing, but then again, so is Let the Right One In. So, yeah, I think that's going to be our outlook for vampires this year. The next one is... I'm not totally sure. I have them all planned out for the rest of the month, but I can't remember exactly off the top of my head what the next one is. But, it should, and we'll once again go in a different direction. I kind of tried to cover a different horror territory with each one, so we'll see how that goes. So yes, that's going to do it for this one, so that's it.